Right now, though, I want to talk about a story that was huge last week, a story so big in some ways, I think you've got to keep going back to it to get it in context and figure out what it all means and what the downstreams of it. It is the Royal Commission into Abuse in State and Faith-Based Care in New Zealand, covering a period of some 50 years, which suggested some 200,000 New Zealanders, almost 30% of the vulnerable people in state care and faith-based care, were subject to some form of abuse, including torture, assault, sexual assault. It made very, very disturbing reading and dominated the headlines last week. But it isn't just a report that is published and then left sitting on a shelf somewhere. The scale of the abuse and the problems found require some sort of response, not just from the government, but from society as a whole. And it would strike me that in some ways that is the toughest part now, what to do about what we found rather than what we found. One of those in the government involved in figuring out what the response to be and how to proceed is the Minister of Education, Erica Stanford, and she joins us on the phone now. Minister, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
Of course, no problem. How are you, Sean?
Very well. Look, but like I think many New Zealanders kind of bowled over, rocked back on my heels last week by the sheer scale of what was uncovered by that Royal Commission.
I think we were. I mean, there's always been sort of individual stories, and we know that something's gone on, but I don't believe that most people knew the scale of it, how much it happened, how many people it affected across the whole of the country over so many decades. I think the scale of it has really rocked people. It certainly affected me. But now we've got a job to do to make sure we put things right. We've got to work on redress, and then we also have to make sure that we've got the systems and processes in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Do we need to accept, though, as a society, that a lot of the ill done, a lot of the damage done will never be put right, cannot be put right? People are dead, they've committed suicide, their lives are forever ruined or turned down a bad path, that actually putting everything right is simply an impossible aspiration?
No, of course. When we pay redress, it's an acknowledgement of what happened, and it's to go some way, together with the apology, to say to those victims or those survivors that we failed you on a grand scale. And of course, it's not going to make everything right. It can't. I mean, I spoke to survivors last Wednesday. I had a number of them up in my office. And the stories that are printed in the book that people can now read, I thought those were horrific enough, but when you actually speak to the survivors themselves, the stories are much, much, much worse. And so, of course, the redress is only part of what we can do, but I think the apology will be very, very important as well. Many of the survivors have been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. A lot of people are
asking me, why wait till November for this apology from the Prime Minister? What's the process there, and what's the reason for that delay?
Well, it's not so much a delay. It's that we want to be able to say some things at the time around the recommendations. So we're working at the moment through the recommendations and certainly through the redress process. We want to be able to not only apologise but say some things about the recommendations, so that we need to digest the report. I mean, it's a huge report, and we've only had it for a couple of weeks. So we want to make it meaningful. I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is we also have to work with survivors on the apology. It has to be survivor-led. So we've been working alongside a couple of groups that we consult with, and also more widely as well, to make sure that we do it in the right way, where we do it, how many times we do it. Do we do it around the country? Do we do it at Parliament? Many of the survivors don't like coming to Parliament. So there are a number of things to consider, and that's what we've been doing.
Okay. How much and how long do you say sorry for? How much does it cost you? How much redress do you pay? Is there a figure on this? Does it have a limited budget? Is there a fiscal envelope?
Those are things that we need to consider that we haven't yet. And the Prime Minister's instruction to me so far has been start with first principles, do the right thing, and then we will look at the fiscals and the money later. But very much he's given us the instructions of get this right first. So we haven't turned our mind. Of course we will have to, but at the first instance we are doing what's right.
Right, okay. It must also be said that the report suggests a picture where 30% of people in faith or state-based care were abused, suffered it some way. That still means that 70% of people got help, that the entire system wasn't corrupt, that it wasn't universally bad.
No, and I think the Prime Minister in his speech made that point very clear, that there were a lot of good people in the system and people who had good outcomes, but there were a significant amount that did not, and the harm that was caused was beyond what I think many of us could even imagine.
Yeah. Yet still, Minister, and once again, many of the people who listen to and engage with the platform are saying this, yet still it goes on. Still baby ruthless empire is dead, and we have families not saying what happened. We still have kids in very parlous situations. And I must add, we have had many people say, and we still have children who are being subjected to medical procedures and hormone replacement therapy and other things that the rest of the world is saying bad for them, and we don't seem to be stopping contemporary, risky and abusive behaviour.
Well, all of the ministers that I lead in but in the ministerial group that have responsibility for care, we're all looking at our individual portfolios and saying, before we even implement the recommendations, what can each of us do in our own portfolios to make sure that the systems and processes are in place that are keeping our children safe. So I have responsibilities for 3 residential schools, for example. I've already asked my officials for a briefing about the systems and processes we have in place, and now I'm going to ask to go back and work out if we can strengthen those in any way. So all of the ministers with care responsibilities are doing exactly the same thing even before the recommendations come out.